the first thing I saw was the colour. A lurid, aggressive, unapologetically ugly shade of yellow, clinging to the front wheel of my vintage Ford Bronco like a metallic parasite. It was a wheel clamp, a boot, a yellow talon of suburban tyranny sunk deep into my property and my peace of mind. For a full 10 seconds, my brain refused to process the image. The world narrowed to that obscene splash of colour against the black rubber of my tyre. A scene so profoundly wrong, it felt like a glitch in the Matrix. Because this wasn't a city street or a public parking garage. This was my land. My small, legally deeded, wholly owned patch of green earth. A throat being cleared, a sound dripping with smug satisfaction, snapped me back to reality. Standing by my driver's side door, holding a clipboard like a scepter, was Mr. Gerald Albright, President Pro Tem of the Azure Springs Homeowners Association. Albright was a man whose body seemed to have been designed by a committee of accountants, soft, pale, and utterly devoid of sharp angles, but his eyes held the flinty glint of a petty dictator. "Morning, Mr. Rossi," he said, his voice as smooth and suffocating as shrink wrap. "Looks like you have a bit of a problem." The rage that had been gathering in my chest like a thunderhead finally broke. "A problem? You're damn right I have a problem, Albright. You've put a boot on my car, on my property. What in God's name do you think you're doing?" He tapped his clipboard with a perfectly manicured finger. "Enforcing the bylaws, I'm afraid. Article the 4th, Section 8, Subsection B clearly states, no vehicle shall be parked on any unpaved or non-designated surface within the community." Your gravel patchy said the words with a theatrical shudder of disgusties, a flagrant violation. "We've issued 3 written warnings. You chose to ignore them." "Ignore them?" I responded to every single one. I shot back, my voice rising. "I sent you copies of my deed, the county plat map, the legal exemption notice. This plot of land, Lot 7A, is not part of the Azure Springs HOA. It never has been. Your bylaws end at that sidewalk." I pointed to the pristine concrete ribbon that separated my small half-acre from the endless sea of identical beige houses. "You have no jurisdiction here." Albright simply smiled. A thin, bloodless line. A common misconception. While your plot is, regrettably, exempt from monthly dues, your presence within the geographical boundaries of our community means you are subject to all aesthetic and behavioral covenants. The view? The community standards these things affect the property values of our paying members. We can't have your rustic aesthetic dragging us all down. It was the same infuriating circular logic he'd used in his matters. He was claiming authority over my land by virtue of the fact that his members could see it. It was madness. This half-acre was the only thing my grandfather had left me. He was an old Italian stonemason who bought this patch of land back in the 50s when this whole valley was nothing but farms and open fields. He built a small workshop, planted a magnificent oak tree, and installed a simple stone bench overlooking the creek. He lived and worked here his whole life. When the developers came in the late 90s to build the soulless, sprawling expanse of Azure Springs, my grandfather refused to sell. He fought them for years, and with the help of his best friend, a young firebrand lawyer who would go on to become a major figure in city politics, he won. His property was legally grandfathered in, a tiny, sovereign nation of rusticity and memory, surrounded by an ocean of taupe stucco and restrictive covenants. When I inherited it, the workshop was dilapidated, but the land was still beautiful. I tore down the unsafe structure, but I kept the old oak tree and the stone bench my grandfather had carved. It was my escape from the city, a place to breathe. I was a landscape architect, and this land was my canvas, my sanctuary.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Architect, and this land was my canvas, my sanctuary. I laid a simple, unobtrusive gravel patch under the oak's canopy to park my Bronco, a spot invisible from the main road and well within my property lines. The first notice from the HOA had been almost laughable. a polite but firm letter about an unapproved surface modification. I'd written back, attaching the legal documents proving my exemption. The second notice was less polite, referring to my gravel patch as an eyesore. I sent another, more forceful letter. The third, which arrived a week ago, was a final warning, printed in red ink, stating that any vehicle found on the offending surface would be subject to immobilization at the owner's expense. The fine for removal, it noted, was a staggering $500. I had crumpled it up in a fit of rage, assuming it was a bluff, an empty threat from a powerless committee. I had been wrong. Now, standing in the morning sun, with my car held hostage by Albright's yellow talon, the full weight of his unhinged obsession with control crashed down on me. He wasn't just a busybody, he was a zealot. He truly believed he had the right to do this. "You can't be serious, Albright," I said, trying to rein in my temper. "This is illegal. It's unlawful seizure of private property. I'll sue you. I'll sue the entire HOA. He actually chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Go right ahead, Mr. Rossi. Our legal team is quite formidable. They will tie you up in court until your rustic Bronco rusts into a pile of dust. Or, you can pay the $500 fine, sign a compliance agreement, and have your vehicle released within the hour. The choice is yours." He held out the clipboard, a payment form attached to the top. I stared at it, then at him, then at my trapped car. I felt a surge of pure, primal helplessness. He had all the power. He had the lawyers, the organization, the sheer, unblinking audacity. I was just one man. I could fight, yes. I could spend thousands on legal fees, waste months of my life trying to prove a point I already knew to be true. And he knew it. He was counting on me to do the math and surrender. My shoulders slumped. I felt the fight drain out of me, replaced by a cold, bitter resignation. He had won. The thought was nauseating. I looked away from his triumphant face, my gaze drifting past the clamped Bronco, towards the ancient oak tree that stood as the silent heart of my property. I looked at the simple stone bench my grandfather had built with his own 2 hands, a place of quiet contemplation. And then I saw him. An older gentleman, sitting on the bench, almost hidden in the deep shade of the oak tree. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored grey suit, reading a morning newspaper as if he were sitting in a quiet park instead of the middle of a suburban battlefield. He had been there the whole time, a silent observer to the entire ridiculous drama. My heart stopped, then started again with a jolt of adrenaline that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with a sudden, blinding flash of hope. Albright followed my gaze, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "Is that a friend of yours? He's on private property, you know. Technically, the HOA's common area starts at the tree liner." He trailed off as the man on the bench deliberately folded his newspaper, placed it neatly beside him, and stood up. He wasn't a large man, but he moved with an unhurried grace and an aura of deep, unshakable authority. He began walking towards us, his polished shoes making no sound on the soft grass. My defeat and resignation evaporated, replaced by a grin that spread slowly across my face. Albright's petty kingdom, built on a foundation of beige paint and bylaws, was about to be hit by a constitutional earthquake. "A friend?" I said, my voice now calm and steady. "You could say that." "Albright, I don't think you've been properly introduced. Meet City Councilman Marcus Thorne." The name hit Gerald Albright like a physical blow. All the colour drained from his already pale face, leaving it the shade of old parchment. His smug posture collapsed, his shoulders slumping as if the tailored jacket he wore had suddenly become a suit of lead armour. The clipboard, his symbol of power, slipped from his nerveless fingers and fell to the grass with a soft thud. He stared, his mouth opening and closing silently like a beached fish, at the man now approaching us. Councilman Marcus Thorne was a legend in this city and had been for 40 years. He was the city's institutional memory, A man who knew every zoning ordinance, every county statute, every legal precedent by heart because, in many cases, he had been the one to write them. He was famously incorruptible, fiercely intelligent, and possessed a quiet, steely demeanor, but had publicly dismantled governors and corporate CEOs alike. And, most importantly, he had been my grandfather's best friend, the young lawyer who had helped him fight off the developers and secure the legal sanctity of this very piece of land all those years ago. "Sam, my boy," Marcus said, his voice a calm, resonant baritone. He ignored Albright completely, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "I was just enjoying the morning shade from this magnificent old oak. Your grandfather would be proud of how you've kept this place, but it seems you're having some trouble with the local gentry." He turned his gaze to Albright, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mr. Albright, isn't it? President of the Azure Springs HOA. We've met. At that budget hearing last year? You were arguing, quite vociferously I recall, against the funding for a new public library because it didn't directly benefit your gated community." Albright swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "Councilman Thorne. I didn't realize you were... what a surprise to see you here." "I'm not surprised," Marcus said, his eyes flicking down to the yellow clamp on my Bronco's wheel, then back up to Albright's face. "Sam invited me for coffee to discuss a proposal for a new community garden initiative. I often park on the street and walk through this little oasis to clear my head. It's a lovely, historically significant property, which is why I find this situation so deeply perplexing." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conversational, almost friendly tone that was somehow more menacing than any shout. "Gerald, let me give you a free legal and historical education. This parcel, Lot 7A, was recorded with the county in 1953. The Azure Springs development, covenants, conditions, and restrictions were filed in 1998. The county charter, under which your HOA was granted its corporate status, specifically cites Title 14, Section 202, which protects pre-existing non-conforming parcels from the bylaws of any subsequent residential association. That exemption isn't a loophole. It is a foundational principle of property law in this state." He gestured to the clamp. "This device, therefore, is not a tool of enforcement. It is an illegal seizure of private property, or, as the district attorney might prefer to call it, theft by unlawful taking. Furthermore, your demand for a $500 payment to release it constitutes what a less generous man than myself might term extortion." Albright was visibly trembling now. "But the bylaws, community standards, your bylaws are a private contract between your members, Gerald." Marcus cut him off, his voice hardening slightly. "They are subordinate to county law, state law, and the United States Constitution. Attempting to enforce them on a non-member on his own private property is a gross overreach of your charter. A charter, I might add, that comes up for review."
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
I might add, that comes up for review and renewal by the City Council's Zoning and Planning Committee next year. I am the chairman of that committee. The final sentence landed with the force of a guillotine. In that moment, Albright wasn't just a chastened HOA president, he was a man staring into the abyss of his own annihilation. His entire world, his power, his identity, was derived from a charter that Marcus Thorne held in the palm of his hand. Marcus pulled out his phone. He didn't dial 911. He scrolled through his contacts and made a call. "Morning, Helen," he said warmly. "Marcus Thorne here. I'm down at the old Rossi property off Lilac Lane." "Yes. The grandfathered one. We have a bit of a situation. The Azure Springs HOA has illegally clamped Mr. Rossi's vehicle on his own land. Yes. I'd like you to pull the HOA's corporate charter and all their filed air-townsure." "Bylaws?" "Yes. All of them. And Could you have someone from the city attorney's office give me a call in about 10 minutes? I believe we'll need to discuss sending them a formal cease and desist, and perhaps exploring sanctions for operating outside their legal authority. Wonderful. Thank you, Helen. He hung up and smiled pleasantly at the petrified Mr. Albright. Helen, at the county recorder's office, is so efficient. Now, Gerald, I would advise you to have this tramp removed immediately. I would also advise you to waive any and all of these fictitious fines. And finally, I would strongly advise you to personally draft a letter of formal apology to Mr. Rossi on behalf of your entire association. Am I making myself clear? Yes, Councilman, Albright squeaked, his voice barely a bay. Whisper. He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely dial. Yes, absolutely. Right away. He spoke into the phone in a panicked, hushed tone, ordering his contracted towing company to return immediately for an emergency removal. He didn't look at me or Marcus again. He retrieved his clipboard from the grass and scurried away, a defeated man retreating from a battle he never should have picked. 15 minutes later, a tow truck arrived. The driver, a large man who looked deeply unhappy about the whole affair, removed the clamp with a pneumatic wrench. The hiss of the air tool was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. He tossed the yellow boot into the back of his truck and drove off without a word. My Bronco was free. Marcus and I sat on the old stone bench, the same spot where he had sat with my grandfather countless times. The sun was warm, the air was clean, and the oppressive cloud of Albright's tyranny had vanished. He won't bother you again, Marcus said, looking out over the creek. People like that, their power is an illusion built on the assumption that no one will call their bluff. Once you do, the whole facade collapses. I can't thank you enough, Marcus, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I was at my wit's end. He clapped me on the shoulder. Your grandfather was one of the stubbornest, most principled men I ever knew. He fought for this little piece of peace. The least I can do is make sure the fight stays won. The next day, a formal, groveling letter of apology from the Azure Springs HOA arrived via courier. 2 weeks later, at their monthly meeting, Mr. Gerald Albright resigned his position, citing personal reasons. The war was over. I still park my Bronco on the gravel patch under the old oak tree. Every now and then, I see one of my neighbors from the HOA stare at it, but they never say a word. They know this land is different. It's a place with a history, protected by a memory stronger than any bylaw. It is my own. And sometimes, on a quiet Saturday morning, Councilman Marcus Thorne still stops by for coffee, and we sit on the old stone bench, enjoying the peace.